Hi, everybody. Welcome to session 3 of 4 sessions. And in today's session, we're going to start adding layers on top of the dry paint that we've already done. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, I've got my size 8 round. I'm going to get this area wet where I'm going to darken the top part of his leg and also work to blend it in so it doesn't look like a stuck-on area. But first, I'm just going to get it wet. Make sure you don't have any puddles. Getting some pure pyrrole orange. Thinking. Changing my mind. Painting is very much a thinking game, isn't it? All right, so I'm going to get this cooler. So anytime you add blue to a color, it makes it cooler. So I'm getting a more of a gray color now. There is a lot of gray on the front of his leg in this area where I'm about to work. So I'm getting it pretty thick, pretty creamy. Pretty close to gray. Trying to get that rounded shape of his muscle on the top of his leg there. Now I've got a very watery brush because I just dipped it in my water, cleaned it out. Now I'm getting a more purple mix, dirty purple. Gonna blot out that brush so it's not quite so drippy because that will make me lose control. And I'm just gonna get this real tea consistency, blot it out, and I just want to blend this together. If you look at the reference, the shadow in his chest is touching the top of the leg and kind of making a disappearing edge there. So that's a clue to you as an artist where it would be a good place to put a disappearing edge. I like to put disappearing edges where a similar value meets another similar values meet. So the bottom of his chest is pretty dark gray because it's in shadow, and then the top of his leg is a dark gray. So you just make those areas blend together because it's not in an important area, so it's yet another opportunity to create dreaminess. The more lost edges you have that melt into each other, the better. And so now that all this area in his chest is dry, we can put another layer of texture of chest fur here while we're at it with tea consistency gray. And you can just use the same gray mix that you've been using. You can just use pyrrole orange and ultramarine. Studying the reference closely, painting in the direction of the fur, making my brush strokes about the length of the fur. Even though this area is white fur, it's got a lot of shadow in it, so you paint it like it's gray. With tea consistency, gray on dry paper. And I want to make this edge really delicate. So I'm being really conservative and just using light tea consistency gray there to show the edge of his chest, but being careful to leave the white fluff that's catching the light perfectly white and dry. All right, getting some pure pyrrole orange. This is about my size 2 or 4 round. Getting it milk consistency. I'm going to paint around a lighter area of fur in this area. Look at the reference. It's almost like a half star shape in this area of lighter fur. So this is what we do so often. We paint around the lights. So I am finding the larger shapes of value in the fur. I'm not thinking to myself, I'm painting each individual fur. I'm looking for the larger shapes in the fur and painting those. That's the same way you do it when you're painting human hair or any kind of hair. You look for the larger clump shapes and paint those. And in this case, we're going to paint around it. So I'm painting on dry paper and I'm painting the milk consistency pyrrole orange around it. And this paper did something kind of weird. I thought it would be really easy to soften these edges, but the paint settled into my paper really fast, and I really had to work to soften these edges because you can't leave it like that all hard edge. That looks weird. So next we'll soften it. So just stay tuned. But hopefully you can see how I saw a lighter shape of fluff in this area, fur shape, and I painted around it. We are going to fix it a lot. Stay tuned. Basically, I'm going to soften all of this with a damp, cleaned out brush. See here, I'm dropping in clean, clear water. But to my surprise, because this is Hahnemühle cold press, this is not Arches, so it acts a little different. That's why it's really good to practice your studies on a nice piece of paper because different papers react differently. Arches would have never done this. I would have been able to go in with drips of paint and soften these edges, but they already set up and became hard. It was crazy how fast this dried. And I was surprised here. I was like, what the heck? I can't soften this. So I'm going in with a bit of a stiffer scrubber because I'm kind of being forced to. This Hahnemühle isn't as good at being scrubbed, so I am not scrubbing hard, but I cannot leave these hard edges. It would look ridiculous. It would just look stuck on. So I'm going in with a watery, stiff scrubber, my small one, and just scrubbing at these edges to make it soft. And you can still see the shape, but now the edges are mostly softened and it looks a lot more natural, of course. But if you find just a few larger shapes in the fur and paint those, the reader will fill in the rest of the details. The viewer will fill in a lot of the details. All right, now I'm going to get a cooler orange. It's cooler because we're adding blue. Anytime you add blue, think of ice. You're cooling a color off, and this makes it a more chocolate color. So I'm getting a warm orange now, and I'm just continuing to build on top of this previous layer that we allowed to dry, and now we're repainting over, and I'm painting on wet paper here, damp paper, I should say. So the brush strokes that I put down about milk to cream consistency here are nicely blooming out softly. But because it's not too wet, they're holding their shape. And it makes it look really fluffy and furry and soft to be able to do that. All right, I'm just getting a clean brush real quick, my 12 long rounds. This is my Velvet Touch paintbrush, and it has a really nice point on it. I'll really enjoy. Or up, okay, I changed my mind. Sorry. This is like a 0 or maybe a 2 round, real small. I'm about to put in some details. Oh, I'm getting some yellow, Aureolin yellow. It's the only yellow I really use is Holbein Aureolin. For those of you new to me, I don't use a lot of different paint colors. I use mostly what I have here on my paint palette. All right, so while this is still damp, I'm painting in between the fingers of lighter fir clumps. Do you see how I did that? And it's obviously on damp paper because it's soft. So I'm just giving it a little bit more definition with some thicker cooled down orange. I cooled it down with French ultramarine. You could cool it down with cobalt too. Pyrrole mixes really pretty with cobalt, I've found. And then as I get out onto dry paper, I use dry brush techniques to kind of scrub some fur textures on there. Dropping in drips of water just to keep everything soft. Of course, I always drip the water in the light area and let it push out into the thicker paint around it. So that's what I'm doing, just dripping clean, clear water next to the darker, wet paint to see if I can get any interesting pushed textures. That's some thick chocolate brown paint I'm adding there in between the clumps to give it some depth and dimension. I might be going overboard too, but later we can paint over that lighter area if we decide we need to calm down the contrast. All right, while I'm at it and everything's damp, I'm putting in a few strokes of longer, darker fur to add depth to the fur. Deep, fluffy hair is going to have darker shadows next to the lighter clumps. All right, with the tip of my size 1 round, I'm adding a little bit of texture into the middle. This is getting dry, it's setting up, and it's allowing me to paint some longer brush strokes of long fur details into this lighter area. And I'm being careful to look at my reference to see the direction of the fur and the direction of the shadows between the clumps. So that looks a lot better. Now that I put a little bit of detail, just a little in the lightest middle part of that larger clump I just painted around. All right, I'm going to put in a few more details to tell the story of the ears, not putting in every detail, but just enough to make the ear make sense. And I'm studying my reference and doing what my reference tells me. And I always say this, more than listening to me, look at the reference and do what it tells you. So there's some darker, pretty chocolate brown details in this area because we're going down around underneath the curvature of the ear, and it's darker because there's a shadow under the ear. And then I'm going in with clean, clear water and softening some of the marks that I just made. And where my paper is drier, it's holding those long strokes that I'm painting, just a few to tell the story of the long hair in this area, and then I can go in with clean, clear water and kind of loosen it up as needed. So I pull my wet brush that has clean, clear water through that area too, to just see if I can get it to loosen up and have some texture that's soft. And now this is dry brush on dry paper with about milk consistency chocolate brown mix that I already had on my palette. And now I've got a clean, clear water brush. Now I'm going to go in and soften what I just put down on dry paper. So I'm touching the margins here and there of those marks to soften them. Getting some more pure Pyrrol transparent orange. Putting in a little bit of detail around the eyes here on dry paper. Remember, if it starts looking too hard-edged and too busy or too textured, you can always go in with a clean brush that's wrung out and touch here and there around the edges of the marks to soften them here and there. Leave some edges hard, leave some soft. And it'll really soften your fur up beautifully to do it that way. Then as this is half dry, I'm going in with a damp brush and just seeing if I can make some texture with some clean, clear water on my brush. So I'm dripping water again next to that darker area to see if it'll push into it. Sometimes it will and sometimes it won't. So I'm soaking up water now. I'm cleaning out my brush, squeezing out the excess water. Got this clean brush. I'm mushing it on my paper to lighten some areas. And then I go in with drips of water to see if it will push into those dark chocolate brown damp spots to make a pretty cauliflower that looks like a fur edge. It's not doing much. It might be too dry. But an artist can try. So I'm just trying to loosen this area up while it's still damp. Just splat some clear, clean water and just soften things here and there with clean, clear water brush. Getting about milk consistency, just adding a little bit more depth of color here and there. And then going back in with a clean, clear water brush and loosening up whatever I just put in. You can pull the paint too with your finger and make edges look more natural. Blot with a tissue if it gets out of control, like I just did. Getting a little bit of red. I'm just going to play with this and see what happens if I drop this in these areas. Will it make it look even brighter if I put a little bit of red in this area? Because I see that there is some areas that look redder. I can see that in my imagination when I look at the reference. So I was just experimenting with it. You don't have to do that if you don't think that looks good. Notice too how much more attention I'm paying to this shoulder area that is coming towards the viewer and how little attention I'm giving to the hindquarters, and I've left them lighter than they are in the reference. Why do I do that? Because the lighter and grayer something is, the more it recedes. And I want his hind end to recede in space. And I want his shoulder to come forward. I want his head to come forward. So the hardest details are in the face. The shoulder is a bold orange color. It's coming forward towards the viewer. It's warm and bold. And the hind end of the fox is quieter, lighter, and grayer and cooler. All right, so I'm continuing. This is what I call my babysitting. I'll squeeze out my brush, mush it on the painting, soak up some paint. Then I'll go in with a clear, clean water drip and drip it back in that area and see if it'll cauliflower it out and just add texture and soften things, put something down, then soften it, and just continue to babysit areas as they dry. There, I blotted out a lighter area. Now I'm dripping in clean, clear water paint to try. I'm really trying hard to get it to cauliflower, and the best time to get cauliflowers is usually in the first layer. So I'm working really hard. I'm probably not going to get too far. That's not going to stop me from trying. Trying to get this area a little bit lighter so it has some nice contrast like it does in the reference. All right, I'm going to add another layer of paint to the tail. I get the whole tail area wet. I do not want this tail hard edged at all. It's receding in space. It's soft, and I will only be painting wet on it. So I'm getting a little chocolate colored paint on my brush. I don't want pure orange because pure orange would come forward. It would be too warm. So I add some blue, just a little bit, and put a little bit more orange, brown orange. Here I'm getting some red. So I did add a little bit of pure color, but also I added some more chocolate colored orange to that tail to give it a little bit more depth and dimension. And I'm totally making it up because I have no reference for that tail. I splat water on it to see if it'll cauliflower. Now you can see I splatted my fox earlier with some orange paint. I don't know if I like that. If you like that, you can do it with some tea consistency orange. Sometimes I feel like that gives the fur a nice variety of texture. And here I go with some more splats. It's up to you whether or not you like this. Not sure it needed it. But you never really know until you get the splats on there and you see, do you like how they look or not? The jury was mixed for me. Also, coming up soon, I'm going to make up a fourth leg because you can't see the fourth leg in this reference. It's not very clear. So I went and looked for reference material online. I'm not really doing much here, so I'm just going to explain what I did with the fourth leg. I went and looked for legs. I finally had to start looking at dogs because I couldn't find any foxes. So here you can see I've penciled an idea in that I think works. And it's very simple. I did find a dog in this exact position and I saw it was just a very simple shape. And so I'm going to make this really light blue and gray and very light in value, not dark. So it as if he's pushing off with his back right leg. So it's going to be really delicate, very very subtle, and it's not going to call attention to itself. And one of the reasons is, well, two reasons. One, it's for the furthest element of the fox away from the viewer. And two, all right, I'm using cobalt. See, I'm getting that cobalt mixed with some orange, and that grays it down beautifully. I'm getting it really tea consistency. I'm going to paint on dry paper, and I'm going to keep this really, really watery so that this leg looks like it's receding back into space. And see, I could already see it was too dark, so I added water, and I'm just going to draw that paint down into a very simplified version of a back leg. Just enough to say, there it is. Because, you always have someone say, well, where's the fourth leg? Well, it's hiding behind the front leg. But some people just, I don't know, I think it distracts them when they're looking for that leg. So I decided to put one in. Again, I made it really cool and light because things that are cooler and lighter and grayer recede back into the background. And I dot at the top to just kind of blend it there. Making it a little darker, give the, I don't know if that's the ankle, but just the joint there that's in that part of the upper foot. A little definition, blotting at it. It does not have to be dark at all. It just needs to barely be there and play a supporting role. So I just was really kind of guessing at some of the shapes that would be in this leg because I really didn't have a very good reference at all to make that up. And I really like the simplicity of this leg too, this white leg. So I didn't want to do too much to it. I really liked how it looked. I'm going to put a little cobalt across it to kind of push it back a little bit. And then blot at it just to give it a very subtle blue haze over it. And then going in with some of this cobalt to blue up some of this shadow, just a little, not much. Getting some pure lamp black. My favorite black is Daniel Smith lamp black. I've got some really cool tutorials demonstrating the fur out approach or technique that you can get with this black. It does something really special. It fuzzes out really neat. So don't miss that if you're new to my tutorials. All right, I'm just going to do, now the eye is completely dry, of course, right? So when you want to get an element super dark, a lot of times what it takes is several layers that dry in between each layer to get things really dark. So I wanted to get the eyeliner really dark, and I wanted to get the pupil a little darker. Again, looking at a second reference that I found of a fox eye, because we can't see much in this reference. Now that I look at it, I do have the shape of the eye a little off, but no one cares. So just adding another layer of about milk consistency lamp black on top of what I already have to darken it even more. I thought these toenails, they were, or his claws, whatever you call them, they were calling a little bit too much attention to themselves. They're super light against super dark with super hard edges with tiny little details, and that tends to draw the viewer's eye too much, and this is definitely not important. And in fact, I could even obliterate them a little bit more, and I think it would be a lot more elegant looking. In fact, I might still fix that because now it's really bugging me. I would just paint over those toenails and not leave that detail there because we don't want the viewer to get confused. Like, why is this so important to have these tiny little details? Well, it's not. All right, I also added a little subtle shadow under that back foot now that it's dry. All right, getting more kind of a purple gray with a little red, little cobalt, little quite a bit of water, and I'm just darkening this leg a little bit. Not much though. So I let that leg completely dry, and now I'm putting another glaze of gray over what I had. All right, I like to scrub personally. I like to do a lot of softening. So when everything's perfectly dry, and as long as you're using decent paper, you should be able to use a stiff scrubber to soften edges. If you're using Arch Cold Press or Bauhung, you'll be able to scrub the bejeebies out of your paper. But because I'm using Hahnemühle Cold Press, I can't scrub too much because it'll damage the paper too much. I can do a little bit though. But I'm going to do a little dry brush here with just a gray purple. Actually, it looks kind of gray orange, doesn't it? And indeed, if I look at the reference, I can see it's quite an orange gray in this area. So on dry paper with tea consistency paint that I blot out my brush, pick up the tea consistency paint, then blot your brush, then scrub the edges of your bristles to create that nice nubbly texture like I just did on his muzzle. And it really sparkles too. I love how it looks. Okay, I'm getting a little more detail to tell the story of the other side of his face. Also, he has an eyebrow that's lighter, so we're going to paint around his eyebrow. So I'm just looking carefully at my reference and adding smaller little details that I think will help tell the story of his facial structure. And now I'm painting negatively on the outside of his muzzle, just to add a little bit of detail on dry paper with gray, kind of a gray orange there. Using cobalt blue. A lot of times when I want a lighter, more delicate mix that's not so heavy, I'll turn to cobalt instead of ultramarine. Ultramarine is for dark mixes. Cobalt is for medium value mixes and more delicate, transparent looking effects. Cerulean is for super light effects or passages. All right, and I refined the edge between the background and the fox's nose to just make it like there's a little bit of white sparkle catching the hairs coming off that area of his muzzle. Now I'm painting negatively. Here we go again, painting around the lights. This part of the fox's ear is light, so we have to paint around the lights, making it a little bit nubbly where we're painting up against the furs and then blending out here further out in the background to blend. We're going to get this background a lot darker to make it more dramatic, to call more attention to this fox's face. So Be sure to stay tuned on how to do that. I don't think it's necessary to make this painting look good, but I'm going to demonstrate it so you can make your choices. Do you want a bold, dark background to make super bold light against dark contrast? And anyway, I'm just using tea consistency gray paint on the white dry paper to add a little bit of the light details. Refining this ear. This ear kind of got clunky on me. I had to do quite a bit of fixing on it. Wasn't really crazy about how it looked. So getting tea consistency, pyrrole orange, blotting. Now I'm getting tea consistency gray, and I'm just filling in this area delicately. I don't want to lose some of these sparkles of white on the face because they really call the viewer's attention to the face, all this white. Put another little bit of shadow under that back leg, back foot, I should say. Now at this point, I'm thinking I might be done with this. I'm going to put on some jewelry. And what jewelry is the final little details. You don't want too much. You don't want too little. And a typical jewelry detail for animals is their whiskers. So when you see me doing the whiskers, I'm thinking I'm done. But I'm not, folks. I'm going to do a lot more to this painting. But I think it could be done. I think this is... If you're getting tired and you like how your painting looks, you might want to stop here and sleep on it. Definitely sleep on it before you go any further, because I think this is lovely. I even like it. I like mine like this. But I am going to go ahead and push this painting further with more bold contrast to see how it looks. I'm not married to this painting. It's not a commission. I can just play with it. So I often do. So it'll be interesting to see what y'all do. Thank you so much for joining me for session 3. And in session 4, we're going to put on the finishing touches and get this painting wrapped up. So I will see you then. Now go watercolor your world. Bye, everybody.